probably evil, and I agree with you that people that have been promoting this should go to prison. I was told in no uncertain terms by the government that if we hired anyone who is not a permanent resident of the United States, had to have either a green card or a citizen, that I would go to prison.
Elon's battle with the Biden administration over SpaceX's hiring practices is not just a legal skirmish.
A few years ago, the Biden administration decided to sue SpaceX for failing to hire asylum seekers.
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
So we're told on the one side that if we hire anyone who's not a permanent resident, we go to prison. Now we're told if we don't hire asylum seekers who are not people who've been granted asylum. Seekers. They aspire to asylum. They are therefore not a permanent resident, but if we don't hire them, we also go to prison.
Right. Well, the purpose of being damned if you do and damned if you don't is to make damn sure that you're damned. So that's a kind of outcome.
So, I mean, that seemed to be insane and unfair. And why did the Biden administration, because they can only do so many big cases per year. There's a finite number they can do.
Yeah.
Why would the Justice Department, of all the injustices that occur, pick this as one of their biggest cases?
Yeah. Why? Why do you think?
Well, I think they probably had I don't know. There was some lawfare, I think. It was a...
What do you think?
I think it was political. Well, I don't know all the things, but this is before supporting Trump or anything like that.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd supported Biden, and before that Hillary, and before that Obama. So... Right,
that's why I was asking if this comes as a shock.
I don't know if it could just be random. Like, they didn't tell us, why pick us? Why do such a crazy lawsuit?
Random's a bad, even if it is random, that's still bad.
It's still bad.
That's just a marker of incompetence. But if it's not random, well, it seems to be highly unlikely to be.
Why attack SpaceX and not, say, Boeing or Lockheed?
In a world where the Democratic Party bends to the will of unions, Elon's defiance is a statement, a refusal to be subdued by those who would trade progress for control.
I think part of it might be that SpaceX is not unionized, and the Democratic Party in the U.S. is fundamentally controlled by the unions. I'm speculating here, but since we're not unionized, we're, I think, a very happy workforce. I'm out there on the factory floor. I don't see, if people are happy, it's a good vibe.
Well, they're engaged in something ridiculously exciting.
It's cool.
At minimum. Well, that's not nothing. People can go a long ways if they're part of a project that's, aiming at Mars, let's say. That's definitely aiming up. So that's really exciting. That's a real opportunity for people.
You have to really take an active role in reducing the number of laws and regulations. Otherwise, as more and more laws and regulations are passed, eventually everything becomes illegal.
Right.
And you start getting into these Orwellian situations where...
then everyone's poor and miserable.
Well, where action A is illegal and action B is illegal, and there isn't anything you can do that is legal. Take an example to give you an example of some lawfare that was leveled against SpaceX, for example. We were told for many years that we could not hire anyone who was not a permanent resident.
Right.
So SpaceX develops advanced rocket technology, which is considered an advanced weapons technology because it's a core part of intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
So there are only a handful of things in the sort of highest level of weapon technology, and rocket technology is one of those, because we could deliver a payload and basically bomb anywhere on Earth. From anywhere on Earth. I was told in no uncertain terms by the government that if we hired anyone who is not a permanent resident of the United States, had to have either a green card or a citizen, that I would go to prison.
Elon was told on uncertain terms by the government that if we hired anyone who is not a permanent resident of the United States, he would go to prison.
Because the presumption, if somebody is not a permanent resident, is that they will leave the United States and take the rocket technology from SpaceX to potentially to countries that would cause harm to the United States.
Right.
Pretty, solid reasoning, I think. I was essentially tricked into signing documents for one of my older boys, Xavier. This is before I had really any understanding of what was going on, and we had gone on, and so there was a lot of confusion. I was told, Xavier might commit if he
that was a lie right from the outset. No reliable clinician ever believed that. There was never any evidence for that. And also, if there's a higher rate. The reason is because of the underlying depression and anxiety and not because of the gender dysphoria. And every goddamn clinician knows that too. And they're too cowardly to come out and say it. Right. And so and then we end up in exactly when I saw that lie start to propagate, it just made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It's like, I see. So you're telling parents that unless they agree to this radical transformation that their children are going to, and you think that's moral and you think that's true. That is so pathological that it's almost incomprehensible. I can't imagine anything worse. I can't imagine a therapist doing anything worse than that, or sitting by idly and remaining silent while his colleagues are doing it. It's pathetic.
Incredibly evil, and I agree with you that the people that have been promoting this should go to prison.
It won't stop till that happens.
Yeah.
It'll just go underground. Puberty blockers are being accessed online by kids all the time through non-medical channels. So, yeah, right. It's not going to stop. Yeah. Okay, so I see. So that's.
So I was tricked into doing this. It wasn't explained to me that puberty blockers are actually just sterilization.
Elon's personal tragedies, including the loss of his son to what he calls the woke mind virus, underscore the relentless pressures he faces from a society he believes is losing its way.
And so I lost my son, essentially. They call it naming for a reason.
Yeah,
all right, so the reason it's called naming is because your son is. So my son Xavier is by the woke mind virus.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that would be like.
So I vowed to destroy the woke mind virus after that.
It seems to me that when we take young people and we give them a genuine humanities education, we solve the alignment problem for them. So the question,
or make it worse.
Well, you do that if it's propagandistic. You can make it much worse.
Which often is these days.
Yeah, that's pretty much that's exactly. Well, that's also exactly what happens, and inevitably when that unbroken tradition is not transmitted. And so this strikes to something that's very essential, which is, well, what's the difference, let's say, or is there a difference between the Western canon, let's say, and the latest woke nonsense? Now, I've used Grok a lot, and it's not as woke as ChatGPT, but it's still woke. Like, it still deviates. Can you address that by, it's just a language model at the moment, let's say, if it also understood images, if it also understood behavior.
It actually does understand images at this point.
Okay, and is the language model and the image understanding, are they stacked on top of each other? Because I think that's partly how we triangulate psychologically, right? We have an imagination and we have a verbal module, but those things have to work in sync. And we also have...
It certainly is intended to work in sync. It is intended to be what's called a multimodal model, which means understanding text, images, and video, and audio.
Okay, if it understands video, will it start to understand behavior?
Yeah.
All this data that you've collected with your cars, so I've been wondering, I know Tesla's a car company, but when I look at what you do,
AI
I don't...
company.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Well,
yeah, well, maybe more. Like, those aren't cars, those are autonomous robots.
Yeah, they're robots on 4 wheels. Autonomous robots on 4 wheels, yeah. They just look like a car.
His commitment to avoiding the pitfalls that ensnare others is not just a strategy, but a moral compass guiding SpaceX through the turbulent waters of modern ideology.
I mean, I think from a moral standpoint, we really just need to think that maybe we've got a chance of it being better to some degree than what others are doing, and we'll strive to avoid some of the pitfalls or directions that the others are going in, because the others, from what I've seen, do not strive for truth.
What do they strive for?
They strive to give an answer, but they are, I think, trained to be politically correct. And the woke mind virus is woven in throughout them.
Yeah?
I'm sure you've seen that.
My students used to ask me because I've been teaching what I've been teaching for about 40 years, and one of the questions they used to ask me is how I knew that what I was teaching wasn't just another ideology, right? Because the postmodern take is, well, all it is a plethora of power games, and so there's no rank ordering approaches to the truth in terms of their ethical suitability, but that's not the game that you're playing.
And I think we do need to be cautious about trying to solve longevity in sort of a live forever type sense, because I think our society, our culture would ossify and the people in power would always remain in power.
Well, and you wouldn't, you know, if you had, let's say, you apprehended a 10,000-year span of consciousness with no sleep.
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell you'd be if that was who you were, but you wouldn't be human.
Sure.
And then we also don't understand that, see, part of the problem, I think, with the perspective that the technologists are taking with regards to human existence is that there's a reductionism there. That's something, it's something like there's no difference between us and the gist of our linguistic network, something like that. Like, whatever we are as conscious beings is a hell of a lot deeper than the patterns of thought that make up our cortical existence. Consciousness is way deeper than cortical existence.
Through the lens of physics, Elon seeks not just the truth of the universe, but a path to preserve the integrity of human progress against forces that seek to dilute it.
I do think you have to ask this gradient question of where does consciousness arise? Now, in a sort of traditional Christian faith, you would say that, well, there's a soul that inhabits the body, and that's the consciousness, perhaps.
So now your questioning took the place, if I got it right, you basically took the scientific tack, hey? Is that right? Because you're...
Yeah, well, I'm trying to understand the truth of the universe. Because physics is essentially study of the truth of the universe, at least those things that are predictable.
Yeah, so when I resolved my existential crisis, which happened about the same time yours did, I didn't study science precisely. I wasn't as interested in the transformations of the material world. So I'm probably more people-oriented than thing-oriented temperamentally. So I started to study evil. Right?
Okay.
So that was my delving into the depths, because I wanted to crack that. I wanted to understand if it not so much even whether it existed, because I became convinced of that very quickly, but what exactly that had to do with me. Because when I was reading history, I read it as a perpetrator and not as a victim or a hero.
I mean, I try to read history to discern the facts of what humans did.
There's satiation reward and there's dopamine incentive reward, and they're not the same.
Sure.
And it looks to me, given what you've already told me about the way that you resolved your existential crisis, is that you consistently pick that's adventure reward fundamentally over contentment. Now, you like your kids and you're content with them, I presume, when you're playing, but the way that you found meaning in your life is not through contentment, it's through adventure. That seems to me the case.
In discussions with Jordan, Elon's support for Trump isn't merely political. It's a declaration of war against the forces that threaten to undermine the future he's working tirelessly to build.
The first thing, there's one question about Trump that I really wanted to ask you. So, are you shocked at the fact that you're donating a substantial amount of money to facilitate Trump's election? Is that something you would have believed in the realm of possibility, say, 5 years ago? And I want to diversify out into California.
What's been reported in the media is simply not true.
Okay.
I'm not donating $45 million a month to Trump.
Right.
Now, what I have done is I have created a PAC or super PAC, whatever you want to call it, which is, I simply call it the America PAC.
You want to tell everybody who's listening what a PAC is, because people
it's a political action committee.
Yeah.
It's an organization. It's sort of a legal entity that can receive funding. That funding can then be used to help with political campaigns.
What do you think of Trump?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to, I don't sort of subscribe to cults of personality.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really just, we've got a choice of administrations, and we have to pick one.
Yeah.
I think there are flaws on both sides.
What do you think his flaws are? And he's a complicated person, and I've been trying to suss him out and figure him out, because some of the things that look like flaws might be advantages in disguise. Like, he seems to me to be pretty good at standing up to psychopathic bullies, for example.
Sure.
And that's kind of a useful skill, and it's not easy. You have to be a bit of a monster to manage that. And it isn't obvious to me how many of the even the divisive idiosyncrasies of Trump are the mirror image of his capacity to stand up to bullies. Right? That's a tough call, man. But so you've obviously decided to lay your efforts down on the side of the Trump administration in the forthcoming election.
Jordan Peterson and Elon Musk discuss the natal crisis, where fewer people are having kids, and agree it's a serious issue. They highlight how this trend could slow innovation and hurt the economy, urging us to rethink our priorities before it impacts the future.
So one of the things that really struck me about your public pronouncements in recent years was your insistence that we're in a natal crisis and that that's actually a problem.
Because, well, that's factually true.
Well, it depends on whether you think that the planet would be better off if it was depopulated. Right? I'm not an extinctionist.
Yeah, Paul Ehrlich is a maniac, as far as I'm concerned. And I think he's a terrible human being.
Yes, and he's never admitted that he was wrong. And he was unbelievably wrong. He made a famous bet. You know the bet.
I hate Paul Ehrlich. I have to be clear about that. I think he's terrible, and his books have done great damage to humanity.
So what? Okay, fine. I talked to a philosopher a while back who was an antinatalist, trying to get my finger on that. There was a recent research article published on this, too. Antinatalists are much more likely to show dark tetrad traits. Machiavellian, psychopathic, narcissistic, and sadistic, because those first three weren't enough, right? And so those things are tightly aligned, especially the best predictor was psychopathy for being an antinatalist.
Sure.
Right. Well, and the psychopaths are very, very, very self-centered, right? They're like overgrown 2-year-olds, overgrown, aggressive 2-year-olds. So that's not good. How did you start to understand that one of the fundamental ethical problems is different than a scientific problem? One of the fundamental ethical problems that's plaguing the West is this catastrophically low birth rate. And you know, when you started making public pronouncements...
Observing the numbers, I mean, I noticed this 20 plus years ago, that the trend in birth rates for really all countries past a certain level of economic development was trending to well below replacement. If not already below replacement. And if you extrapolate the curve, which one always has to be cautious about extrapolating any demographic curve. So I'd always preface by saying, if these trends continue, most countries will dwindle into insignificance. As far as I know, every civilization that has experienced prosperity has had a decline in population. There may be a few exceptions. Perhaps people can enlighten me. I'll look at the comments on this interview to see perhaps what I can learn. But it seems that from what I've read, almost every civilization, when they become prosperous, their birth rate drops.
You think that's a consequence of the emergence of something like a non-punished hedonistic egocentrism?
Well, as you obviously, you mean there's certainly many examples of civilizations that become prosperous. There is generally a trend towards hedonism.
Yeah, well, you can get away with it if you're wealthy, eh? Because the consequences of your actions don't smack you on the head instantly.
Precisely. So, you know, if you're a civilization under threat, like let's say if you take, say, Rome, when they were trying to not get by Carthage, and they had Hannibal running around marauding Italy, they didn't have time for hedonism. Right. Hedonism is not an option. We're going to get destroyed by Hannibal.
The chips are down.
And when a civilization's under stress, there's very little hedonism.